Hi, my name's Tommy Pigott. Welcome to the Republican Rundown. I'm here as always with Madison, Gesiotto, Gilbert, and couldn't be more excited for a special guest this week, Jaime Florez, who is the RNC Hispanic Communications Director. Jaime, thank you so much for joining us on the Rundown this week.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be with you guys.
So I was hoping, and we were hoping, that you could maybe give the people watching a brief rundown of your career, of your life, kind of just give a rundown of basically yourself.
Well, I've been a radio journalist for more than 40 years, most of my life, and I've been in politics since 2001. I was the Hispanic Communications Director for Rick Scott's campaign for re-election as governor of Florida and for the U.S. Senate, and I've been with the RNC for almost 3 years now. It's been great.
So what is your, looking back, what was kind of your favorite career path, I guess? I mean, I guess it's biased. I guess you'd have to say the RNC Hispanic Communications Director. But looking back, do you have a favorite story? What's your favorite sort of part of your career?
Well, this certainly, because, I'm Republican, I'm Hispanic, and my life is communication. So being the Hispanic Communications Director for my party, it couldn't be better. I cannot imagine a better opportunity than this. So it's been wonderful.
Well, we're so lucky to have you, and we're grateful to have you on the show this week. I know we're going to get into so many exciting things about what you've been working on and what you've been doing for the party and for our country, quite frankly. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But first, I think we want to lead off today with some of the special counsel reports, some of the updates on what's been going on. Tommy, you want to lead off with that?
Yeah, so big news over the past week was the release of the special counsel report. It really was a bombshell revelation in terms of how people are really viewing Biden's mental and physical fitness for office. And quite frankly, the majority of the American people are having those concerns. We actually have a clip to show the disconnect between Biden approaching this issue and how the American people are viewing it.
For months, when you were asked about your age, you would respond with the words, "Watch me." Many American people have been watching, and they have expressed concerns about your age.
That is your judgment. That is your judgment. That is not the judgment of the press.
76% of voters have major or moderate concerns about Biden not having the mental and physical health for a second term. That includes more than half of Democrats.
So, Jaime, that more than half of Democrats line, to me, is one of the more compelling. I mean, when you see these concerning polls, what are you thinking? How are you viewing them?
Well, the way many of our people see it, they remind us of our banana republic dictators of many years ago in Nicaragua or Cuba or even Venezuela or the Dominican Republic. Dictators that were very old. They knew that their policies didn't work, but they kept insisting on those, and they kept denying their health problems until the very end. So that's something that we don't want. We never expected to see this in the U.S.
Well, and Madison, I think one of the concerning parts of this is the American people have such concerns about Biden's mental and physical fitness for office. It's clear that even Democrats have those concerns. And yet the Biden White House is refusing to actually be transparent about any sort of aspect of his mental and physical fitness. They're not even letting him do the normal amount of press conferences and interviews. It seems like they're trying to protect him at every single level from scrutiny.
Well, and they've been trying to do this for quite some time. I mean, this is not really a bombshell in terms of people being concerned about his capacity to serve as president of the United States. We all know, and you look at polling, you look at, pretty much any Republican, Democrat, talk to people across the country for the past 3 years, they've always been concerned about his age. They've always been concerned about his mental capacity. But I think for the very first time, we're seeing this in a document such as the special counsel's report, in the media, the mainstream media specifically, is being forced to face it in a way that they haven't before. And I think you're starting to see some of their narrative shift. You still see some people shamelessly on there promoting his mental and physical fitness, which we all know is complete baloney. But you have other people that are shifting the tune. And I think we've seen that through many of the mainstream media networks over the past few days. And I think that's been the most interesting thing to watch about all of this.
Yeah, to that point, we actually have another clip here from CBS News. It's a bit of a long one, but I think it's important to watch to really show the change in the narrative around questions regarding Biden's mental and physical fitness. If we could play that clip from CBS.
This is not a new problem for the White House and for the Biden campaign. There have been long-standing, mounting questions about his age and mental sharpness. And so this only adds to those concerns. And that is why you are seeing so much damage control. That is why the president insisted that he could have the opportunity to take questions and address this head on. At the same time, though, Catherine, another issue might be how willing they are to acknowledge that Americans feel this way and have concerns about his age and cognitive state, because when asked about it twice and how he would reassure voters who have those concerns, he grew angry and frustrated and lashed out at reporters for even asking the question. But certainly they are well aware that this is going to follow them well into the campaign. And now that you have it written out in this extensive report, there are concerns about how this could do real political damage.
Yeah, and Jaime, I think one of the interesting parts of what they're acknowledging there is that Biden goes out to do a press conference to try to do damage control. And yet, as he's trying to do quote unquote damage control, he actually increases concerns that Americans have regarding his mental and physical fitness. And I think that's probably why they don't have him go out and do questions, because every time he opens his mouth, or just about, he embarrasses himself in the country.
Yes, he's uncontrollable, and I don't understand how the communications people of the White House didn't handle that much better. No one has quitted after that. That was a complete disaster in terms of communications. Any one of us understand that very well. And you know, what really concerns us is it's not about his age, it's about his mental capabilities, which are in the worst condition we've ever seen someone in the White House in that situation. I think it's a very concerning matter, not only for the White House, for the whole country as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, that the difference between the mental acuity versus the age, it's the mental fitness that's really at issue. And Madison, I think it's also borne out by his policies, that the reason why Americans, they don't think that he has the mental fitness because they see him confusing Egypt and Mexico. They see him making all these mistakes constantly. But then it's also compounded by the fact that he's also making poor decisions when it comes to policy. So he's embarrassing himself at press conferences, and he's also embarrassing this country behind closed doors with the worst policies imaginable.
I mean, you look back like decades to early in Joe Biden's career, in other capacities when he was serving an elected office, and he was much younger and arguably more mentally fit. However, his policies were always wrong. And so much of what he supported ended up being on the wrong side of history. So much of what he pushed for put us in the bad position we're in today. One of the things that I bring up so often is when you look back to the early 2000s and you talk about China, you talk about Joe Biden at the time being one of the people pushing for China to enter the World Trade Organization, saying they would never be a greater economic threat to the United States than the Netherlands, how wrong he was. And we are where we are today as a result of people like Joe Biden in the early 2000s who underestimated China. And now we see that they're one of our greatest threats, but definitely economically our greatest threat. And so Joe Biden's always been on the wrong side of history. Now it's just compounded by his complete incompetence and lack of mental and physical fitness.
And something that many people is asking is who is really leading the country. We all see that it's not Joe Biden. Joe Biden doesn't have the capabilities, and he's not the fitness. He doesn't have the fitness that he needs to lead the country. So who's doing that? Who's doing that for him? The administration is only lying about many, many things, including the border, the economy, and so on. And we don't know who really is making the decisions and calling the shots in the U.S.
Yeah, and I think it's borne out by the fact there was a recent article about the border, for example, talking about the real disaster and kind of outlining how they got to this point. And part of it was that there were so many disparate people making different decisions. And anytime the issue was brought up to Joe Biden, he got angry and stubborn. And I think we saw that in that press conference when he's asked really important questions about his mental fitness, and he just lashes out at the reporters, refuses to answer them. You see that behind closed doors as well, a lack of coordination, complete chaos all over the place. It's not difficult, Madison, I think, to ask who's making these decisions when the decisions seem to make absolutely no sense. I mean, it's honestly, they say the adults are back in charge, but it seems like they've only brought chaos and dysfunction to the entire world in this country.
Yeah, I know kids that are smarter than some of these adults, so I'm not sure if I have much faith in the adults that are back in charge right now. again, Joe Biden definitely not leading the country. People concerned about who's making the decisions, and they're not happy with those decisions. The reality is the American people across the entire country deserve better. We've seen this time and time again where people elect people to office. They believe the promises that they make them on the campaign trail, and then they're so sorely disappointed very shortly later. And they recognize that they were being lied to, that these career politicians aren't going to do what they said they're going to do. Joe Biden is a great example of that. His administration is the great example of that. And now people are suffering as a result. It will take time to come back from this. And we're seeing that in the numbers. We're seeing that in the border. We're seeing that in the economy. I mean, when you see something like car insurance up over 20% year over year, this is unacceptable and people can't afford to live like this. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with this administration.
Yeah, I think they could put to bed a lot of these questions if they actually had a president that could go out there and answer questions. Karine Jean-Pierre was asked the other day why they don't do more press conferences. And Jaime, I think it's pretty obvious why they don't. It's because they don't trust him to do it. So
of course,
they obviously don't want him out there answering questions.
Yes, definitely. I wouldn't. If I worked for him, I wouldn't let him go be in a camera and a shot or answering questions from journalists. The only opportunity that I've had for doing something like this was when we had meetings with international leaders. And because those international leaders gave the journalists the opportunity to do it, but always was a complete disaster like the one we had last week.
Yeah, it always is. And I think it's also back to the point of who's in charge. On the border, Mayorkas kind of showed that they don't think they're in charge of really anything in the sense of actually taking responsibility. He was asked about the border over the weekend on the Sunday shows. And I thought he gave an astonishing answer when asked, do they bear any responsibility for this border crisis?
No doubt there is gridlock on Congress, but do you bear responsibility for what is happening at the border, what the president himself has called a crisis?
It certainly is a crisis, and well, we don't bear responsibility for a broken system, and we're doing a tremendous amount within that broken system. But fundamentally, Congress is the only one who can fix it.
Yeah, so Jaime, when he says we don't bear any responsibility, that to me is an astonishing statement from someone who is supposed to be responsible for securing the border.
It's interesting that this is the first time I see him talking about a crisis. They have denied that they had a crisis for many, many years. Second, they're mixing two things that are different. One thing is the border crisis, and the other thing is the immigration reform. That we might need an immigration reform, yes, but we have to solve the border crisis at the beginning to start with. There is no immigration reform that will work if we don't control the border. And they have denied that for years, it's 3 years now. They decided to change everything when they came into power. And they made a big mess out of the border that was being controlled. If they really, as they say, we want to fix immigration, what they have to do is try to solve the immigration situation of many people that have been here in this country for more than 20 years, some of them, 10 million people or more than that have not been able to solve their immigration situation, even after paying the fees, filling out all the forms, and waiting for years. If they wanted to help these immigration people, the people that had problems with immigrations, instead of hiring 87,000 IRS agents, they could have hired 20 or 25,000 USCIS personnel to solve the situation of these immigrants that are already here in this country, paying taxes, working, and they still have to wait for more years. Instead of bringing more than 8 million people, new people, without any documents, without any condition, with only the fact that they say that they deserve to be received in this country as political asylum requesters. That doesn't work that way. It's not going to be work. It's not going to work in the next. We don't know how many years we're going to need to solve the problem that the ones that came before had, and now we have almost double the people with the same situation.
It's a complete disaster. I mean, the delay in the courts, years and years, as Jaime mentions, just completely unacceptable. We've talked about it on Rundown before. I know I've talked about it quite a bit over the years, before we even had Joe Biden in office, before there was the crisis there is today, and about needing immigration reform, about needing to fix the court backlogs, about needing to see Republicans and Democrats in Washington come together. That includes the White House. That includes now the Biden administration, who wants to pass the buck off to someone else other than themselves when they have the power to make a change, and they created a lot of these problems. We look at those astounding numbers. I mean, we're seeing just in the first month and a half of 2024, almost 1 million people coming across the border. You look back to 2017, we didn't even have 400,000 in the entire year. You look back to 2019, 4,000, somewhere around there in the entire year. Now we're seeing in just a month and a half, we're not even halfway through February barely, and we have almost 1 million people. This is unsustainable, and it's not fair to the people who have been waiting, that Jaime mentioned, for many years to get through the system.
Yeah, and I think it's the change of tone as well is really striking. Like Jaime mentioned, we actually have another clip here comparing Biden talking 2 years ago about the border versus Biden talking now about illegal immigration. If we could play that clip.
We have a process in place to manage migrants at the border. We're working to make sure it's safe and orderly and humane.
For much too long, as you all know, the immigration system has been broken. And it's long past time to fix it.
So basically two things, like Jaime, you mentioned, that Biden's doing there. First is he's changing the way he talks about this crisis, from first saying that his plan is working to now admitting that it's not. And the second, like you mentioned, conflating the immigration system with the border crisis. And it seems to me that that's really a disservice to this issue, like you were saying, because everyone's for legal immigration. It's just illegal immigration when you have the worst border crisis that's unsustainable, that really is hurting everybody.
We have to ask ourselves, Tommy, how much of this is intentional? How about the Democrats bringing millions of people into this country and probably offer them, I don't know, maybe months from now, some type of amnesty or some type of legalization, so they can have millions of voters that can guarantee that they will remain in power forever? That's something that we have to think about. Is that their intention? Are they really concerned about the immigrants and offering them possibilities to have a new life and a new country that might not be able to offer them what we could have offered them 3 or 4 decades ago? We have serious problems with the people that are already here, that are already American citizens, that don't have a place to live, that don't have food or shelter or education or health care. And we're bringing millions of people from other countries. For what purpose? Are we really trying to offer them a new life and new opportunities? Or are our ideas just bringing people that will vote for us in elections years and years from now on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question, especially when you look at the fact that it's a complete chaos everywhere. I mean, people that are crossing the border now, we've seen New York and Chicago, complete chaos in those cities. And Madison, you've actually mentioned something along these lines before about how we're seeing schools being closed to make sure that there's shelter for illegal immigrants. I mean, people in neighborhoods that don't have resources and the ability to, like, we should be helping people. We should be helping people in this country. And it seems instead that Democrats are more intent on helping illegal immigrants or sheltering them, while at the same time doing nothing to actually solve the crisis and make people's lives better. And everyone is being hurt as a result.
Yeah, I mean, to see what they're doing and to see this mass influx of people, so often we don't know who any of them are, coming into this country while we can't take care of our own. We can't take care of immigrants and non-immigrants alike that are here in America to chase that American dream, that want to have a better life than what their parents were able to provide for them, that want to be able to chase, why in some instances, their parents came to this country, why their grandparents or great-grandparents, like mine, came to this country to chase that American dream, to have a better life than they had. And that's just no longer available to so many young people. And that is the disappointing part. The American dream is farther away than ever before. It's harder to chase. It's harder to attain, in many cases impossible, all because of bad policy, all because of the position that we as Americans have been put in. And again, as I've said so many times, it did not have to be this way. And it shouldn't be this way. It doesn't have to be this way moving forward. We deserve better. We can get better. And it all comes down to making the right choice in these elections and starting to turn things around, get things back on track. Good conservative policies are the solution. They are the answer. We need common sense policies. And that's not what we have right now. We have complete chaos. We have total disaster. And again, as Jaime mentioned, it's that intentionality. It's a feel of intentionality against what is good that we're starting to feel coming from our very own government. If they were there to protect us as they're supposed to, things would be going differently. But instead, they're doing things that don't seem to be successful, but also are not protecting us as Americans. And that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that all of these Americans are hurt, that all Americans are suffering from this. And then it's connecting those dots of, I think the point that you make that I think is so compelling is it didn't have to be this way. And that's why the efforts that we're doing at the RNC are so important, to reach out to voters across the spectrum to make sure that they're connecting these failed policies with the results in their lives. They're seeing how these policies are affecting their lives, and they'll see why Republican policies work better and why they should be voting Republican. I know that Madison and Jaime, you guys talk to people across the country about reaching those voters, and you hear from voters all over about how Republican policies help while Democrat policies hurt. And I thought with Jaime, if you two could discuss more about how we're reaching Hispanic Americans and our efforts there to make sure that we're winning races across the country while at the same time connecting our policies with the disastrous results that we're seeing across the country.
Well, Tommy, what we're trying to tell our Hispanic voters all over the country is that definitely the Republican principles and values are more aligned with the ones that we as Hispanics have than the ones that Democrats can offer. The other thing that Hispanics are discovering, well, first, remember Ronald Reagan, he used to say that Hispanics are Republicans, they just don't know. And Hispanics are very disappointed with the Democrats that have taken them for granted for way too long and have made promises that they never fulfilled, including an immigration reform that was promised by Barack Obama many years ago and never happened. So Hispanics are becoming more and more Republicans, and we're working on that. Hispanics want, for Hispanics, the main issues are the same that for the rest of Americans, of voters in the whole country. We want to have a better economy. We want to have more jobs. We want to have a better education for our kids, education, not indoctrination. We want to have better conditions of life, much safer neighborhoods for our families. That's what we want. We want to have opportunities, and the Republicans are offering that to us. And Republicans can certainly give us better opportunities to achieve our American dream.
And I think we've seen a huge shift in line with what you're saying when you talk about looking back to 2016 until now. And we've seen, I think, a 10-point shift in Hispanics coming over to the Republican Party. And I think that really speaks to the fact that across the country, we have hardworking Hispanic people who are conservative. And they simply do not feel that the Democratic Party represents them any longer. And that's why I think they're coming to the Republican Party. And I think we'll expect to see more of that, Jaime. Do you agree with that?
Definitely, Madison. And I think that one of the reasons is that we're seeing in the Democratic Party of nowadays a very big influence of socialist policies that we've seen in Latin America. Many immigrants that came from Latin American countries to the United States came because they hated those political socialist ideas that some of their leaders were implementing in their countries. The way I say it, we've seen that movie before, and we don't want to see it again in the U.S. We never expected to have in the U.S. Lack of food in the shelters, in the supermarkets, and we had that problem a couple of years ago. We don't want to see things being given away to people that didn't work for them. And we're seeing that. We've seen some Democratic governments in some states and cities in the country not doing what they need to do in order to provide safe places to our kids and our families. And we've seen that in Latin America, and we don't want to see it again in the United States.
That's right. And I think over the past really 5 years especially, but over the past decade, you've seen so many young people here in the United States that are talking about their support for socialism. They're talking about their support for communism, things that people who have studied history would never imagine people would be in support of here in the United States. But what is your message? What do you tell people, especially young people in this country, who are willing to say that they are socialist or that they support socialist policies, when the reality is anybody who's ever lived under a socialist or a communist regime know that there's nothing worse, and we certainly don't want to see that happen here in the United States.
Madison, as Winston Churchill used to say, if I'm not mistaken, is when you're young and you don't have socialist ideas, you don't have a heart. But when you get older and you still have socialist ideas, what you don't have is a brain. Young people have to understand that. Has never worked anywhere. You know, we spent the whole 20th century making, trying to put together some socialist societies that never worked. It didn't work in East Europe. It didn't work in Cuba, in the Caribbean. It didn't work in other Latin American countries. It didn't work anywhere. You know, people, I'm not saying that people are capitalists per se, but what we want is to be able to work more and construct more and build more and have a better quality of life. It's not the same quality for everyone, either you work or not. Like it functions in countries like Cuba. You don't need to work in Cuba to have the basic necessities, which most people don't have. But in this country and in societies like the one we have here, free markets and so on, if you work more and if you develop more in your life, you can give better conditions to your family. That's what we work for, and that's what we want to have. That's the base of our American dream.
That's right. And I mean, you talk about the message, and we have the right message, and it's about connecting that message with people. And I know that's what you've worked so hard on and have done an incredible job. And at the RNC, it's been a big focus of ours over the past years, looking across the country at where we can make a difference. And I know we've opened a lot of community centers, specifically one that I think was very impactful was in Doral, Florida. You look back, and I think it was Marco Rubio who lost that area by 1 point in 2016. And after the community center and other efforts in that area, we saw a 23-point shift to a 22-point win ultimately for Marco Rubio there. Speak a little bit about the community centers and the efforts that have been made by the RNC to connect not only with Hispanics, but to connect with minority communities all across the country.
Madison, on the last cycle, we had 38 community centers opened all over the country. Half of them were Hispanic community centers, but we had also Asian Americans, African Americans, veterans, many other communities had the opportunity to have a community center in their areas. Those community centers were much more than just campaign offices. Of course, we did the things that the campaign offices do, like recruiting volunteers and knocking doors and making phone calls and so on. But we had a place where our communities with different aspects of life had a place where they can meet and discuss the things that they have within their regular communities, but also their relationship with the Republican Party. It was a place with a two-way conversation between the party and their voters. We had the opportunity to register people as Republicans in the different jurisdictions. We had the opportunity to provide them with places for meetings, and we had the opportunity to teach them for their immigration, for the citizenship tests, and it worked great, and people really miss those community centers that we're going to be opening more for this cycle, and they're going to work as well as they did a couple of years ago.
Well, I can't speak higher of the efforts that have been made, and I know it's just really the beginning as we continue to expand on these efforts. Every single American, as we mentioned before, deserves better, and we need more people coming over to the Republican Party. We need more independents voting for Republican candidates this year in 2024 to make that a reality for people. And so we appreciate your efforts. I appreciate you joining us. Looking forward to having you on again throughout this cycle as we get closer and closer to beating Biden in November. Tommy, Jaime, thank you. And we'll see everybody next week on the Republican Rundown.